Hi everyone, it's Miss Christina, and I have a question for you. Have you ever looked up in the sky and tried to count the stars? Sometimes it might be hard to see the stars, but if you're ever up on the mountains where there's no extra light and you look up, you will see a sky that is absolutely filled with stars. But if you tried to count all of those stars, you would probably be very exhausted because there are so many. As a matter of fact, scientists don't even know how many stars there are. They can only guess. But their guess is that there is about 100 million stars just in our galaxy, the Milky Way. This whole month of May, we are talking about how God got the attention of many people in the Bible. He wanted to get their attention because he had a message they needed to hear. Our story today is about a man named Abram, and God used the stars as a way to get his attention. Now Abram was a very old man, and he had a wife named Sarai. She was very old too. And the story starts off a little bit sad because Abram and Sarai didn't have any children. But they had always wanted to have children. Now they were too old and they both figured that it would never happen for them. They would never get a chance to be called Dad and Mom. But we all know that God can do anything, right? And he had something special planned for Abram and Sarai. One night, God came to Abram and took him outside. While they were outside, God told Abram to look up at the sky. What did he see? He saw stars, lots and lots of stars. God asked Abram if he could count the stars. Then he told him that just like all those stars, that's how big Abram's family was going to be. Even though it sounded a little crazy, Abram believed God. Abram knew that God keeps his promises. And if God told him something, then Abram knew it was true. Abram was about 75 years old when God showed him the stars in the sky. That's pretty old to become a new dad, isn't it? But that's only the beginning of the surprising things that God had in store for Abram. Because guess what happened in those next few years? Oh, you're thinking a baby was born? Maybe you're thinking 2 babies were born. Well, guess what? You're wrong, because in those next few years, nothing happened. No baby. All that was happening was Abram and Sarai were getting older and older. Abram might have started doubting what God had told him earlier about the stars being as big as his family. After all, nothing was happening. But God assured Abram that he was still going to have a big family. God told Abram, "You will have so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that no one will be able to count them. And now I'm going to change your name. You will now be called Abraham, and your wife will be Sarah." There was significance in the names because Abraham means father of many, and Sarah means mother of nations. But this time, Abraham didn't trust God like he should have. He started thinking of reasons why what God was saying couldn't be true. You see, by this time, Abraham was 99 years old. His wrinkles had wrinkles. His wife Sarah was really old too. So Abraham laughed at what God was saying. But God wasn't laughing, because when God makes a promise, you can trust that it is true. So God said to Abraham, "You will have a son. You will name him Isaac, and your family will bless many nations." A little while later, some men came to visit Abraham. There were 3 men, and Abraham invited them to come in and have something to eat. As they were eating, one of the men asked Abraham, "Where is your wife Sarah?" Abraham answered the man that Sarah was in the tent. And the man said to Abraham, "Well, by this time next year, Sarah will have a baby." Sarah was in the tent, but as you know, tents don't have very thick walls. So Sarah could hear everything the men were saying. And she heard the man say, "By this time next year, Sarah will have a baby." And Sarah thought this was the most ridiculous thing she had ever heard. There was no way. She was old enough to be a grandmother, or even a great-grandmother. She was way too old to be having a baby. So do you know what she did? She started giggling. And then the more she thought about it, the funnier it seemed, and she started laughing. The men outside the tent asked Abraham, "Why is Sarah laughing? Is anything too difficult for God?" You've ever had that feeling when you did something wrong and you got caught? Maybe your mom asked you to clean out your room, but you just shoved everything under the bed. And you thought you got away with it, but then your mom looked under your bed. Well, Sarah knew she had been caught, so she quietly came out of the tent and denied that she had laughed. She said, "I wasn't laughing." But the men knew. They had heard her laughing. But just because Sarah didn't believe it could be true didn't mean it wasn't going to happen. God still had a plan, and Abraham and Sarah were the ones who were going to carry out that plan. So just like God promised, by that time next year, Sarah had a baby. Abraham was 100 years old when the baby was born, and Sarah was 90 years old. Abraham did as God commanded. He named the baby Isaac. When Sarah saw her sweet baby boy, she said, "God brought laughter to me, and now everyone will be able to laugh with me." Do you remember those stars we saw at the beginning of the story? Do you remember how God promised that Abraham's family would be like the stars in the sky? Well, Isaac grew up and had children, and then his children had children. And it went on like that for thousands of years. And so what God said was true, because many, many, many years later, Jesus was born from the family of Abraham. And that is why so many nations are blessed by Abraham's family, because Jesus came from that family. God got Abraham's attention. He did it in a fascinating way. He showed Abraham that nothing was too difficult for God. And he showed Abraham and all of us that when God tells us something, we can trust that it is true, even if it might seem a little bit crazy. I hope you're all remembering to trust God during this time. Remember, God is in control, He still loves you, and He is right beside you all the time. And don't forget, today is Mother's Day. Make sure to tell your mother, your grandmother, or whoever takes care of you that you are glad that God gave them to you. We'll see you all next week. Goodbye.